Good morning, everybody. I'm Paul Adams from Branston Adams. I need to say thank you to Mark Robson and Castle Inn for hosting us. Is there any news today, Mark?
Any news?
Well, any events coming up? So book your Sunday lunch. Is that about it? Fantastic. And we've got Tom from the hospice who will join us from the end. And Steve and I normally have an interesting conversation about interest rates at this time, because it turns out the Bank of England announced the interest rate changes on the first Thursday of the month, which is when we meet. Forecasts to stay the same this month, currently 5.25%. My personal forecast, I think it will go down in August. Stephen will, if Stephen's hiding somewhere. He is at the back.
There's the bank.
Yeah, it's all right, Stephen. We're just talking about you, Stephen. It's all right. Which is why longer-term mortgage interest rates have gone down a little bit. So I'm joined today by this gentleman. Would you care to introduce yourself?
Morning all. My name is Des Haley. My company is DAG Services. We just recently moved to Farnham.
It's going to be like that, is it, Des? So we're going to find out a bit about Des, what he does work-wise, and it's a theme amongst all our speakers, putting stuff back into community and looking after the fellow man, play it forward, call it what you will. So shall we start at the beginning, Des? Where were you brought up?
I was born and brought up in Hertfordshire. And my parents moved this way to Hale when I was 10. So my schooling and that sort of thing was all fairly local. I went to local school, didn't do particularly well at school. I don't really know what happened. I think my parents they weren't very happy with each other. They loved the family, but they didn't really like each other very much. So it was quite disruptive for me. So I went through school and ended up leaving school with, I think, a poor O-level pass in ancient history. And I thought, this isn't really going to get me that far. So I bounced around a little bit, went to Guildford College to do a surveying ONC. And within a year, Guildford College and myself agreed it's probably best that I left. Not because I was disruptive, but I just didn't really have a clue, didn't know what I wanted to do. So I went home and my mother said, well, you're not going to play with motorbikes all day, you're going to go and get a job. So I remember coming down to the old job centre down here, looking through, and I found an apprenticeship or a traineeship in building services engineering. And that's really what I did. And funnily, that's really what made me, in the sense of all of a sudden I had a structure and I realised it was really just up to me. So what I did was the first few years I thought, I've got to do the apprenticeship, which is fine, but also I need to educate myself. So what I did was I sent myself back to night school that you could do. I'm not quite sure about the night school system, if you can do that now. You probably could.
Yeah, you probably can.
Yeah. So I sent myself back to night school, and that's where I got my O-levels and then A-levels. So I sort of spent the next few years just my head in a book, and just studying like mad and just getting that and sort of fighting back really, because I felt that I'd missed an opportunity. So that was really where it started.
So that's a good start. So obviously at that point you were employed, you did all your training.
I was.
And at some point you made the leap into the wide open spaces to form your own business.
I did. Yeah, I did. Well, what I did was I did a local apprenticeship company based in Farnham, Southern Mechanical Services. And the idea really was that being a building services engineer, especially in the commercial sector, we would look after buildings. A little bit like this, Mark. We'd look after buildings. So we'd look after the lighting, the power, the infrastructure, the gas boilers, the oil boilers, whatever they are, but all the mechanical, electrical type things. That's what we did. And so I was really based over in Basingstoke. So in those days, a young guy, didn't have a lot of money, so I'd had old motorbikes that would always break down. So I was always sort of like going from, getting a lift, hitchhiking to work and all this sort of stuff. But I realised really that if you didn't turn up and you were late and all the rest of it, you were going to be out the door. And really, the first thing I got onto was a youth opportunity scheme for those people who are old enough to remember that.
YTS.
YTS. And so the government topped your wages up, I think it was, but the wages were pretty dire. But I kind of realised that I was on the first rung of the ladder, and I had to fight for everything I got. And in those days, the company I worked for were very dog eat dog. So a director would go on holiday, get back, and they'd be kicked out, or somebody be, it was a real dog eat dog atmosphere. And it was frightening, but on the other hand, it was the law of the jungle, so you had to really fight for your position in the company. And that's kind of what I did, so I just made myself as valuable as I could be, and just gradually sort of grew. Then I got to the point where I was big enough, I knew enough, and my parents were on contract in Southern Africa, in Zimbabwe at the time. So I went and I gave up work and I went off and spent some time with them. And I did some local work with local people in South Africa and in Zimbabwe. Then I came back and I managed to get a job with Honeywell Controls. So if you look in your living room, the little thermostat on the wall, that's usually a Honeywell Control thermostat. Went to work for them as a junior engineer. And I just, over the next 10 years, I gradually progressed to the point where I was a medium engineer, I suppose, and then I became a senior engineer with them. And it was a great journey, and they were a huge American multinational corporation, but they were very much on training, development, and there was lots of things you could do with them, which I really liked. What was great for me at that time was that one of the directors in America was an ex-United States Navy submarine commander, and he was all for joining the reserve forces, the TA or the auxiliary air force or whatever it was. So as a single guy, I thought, God, that's a great idea. So I joined the TA, and I was in the Royal Engineers. I joined the Royal Engineers. So I was doing a busman's holiday, and the Honeywell and the Army were paying me to go off to Ascension Island and the Falklands and the Middle East to do all my training with them. So I loved it, I absolutely loved it. So that I kind of just got lots of experience and lots of experience, I guess, and knowledge with that. Just really grew. And then I got to the point where I wanted to, about the time of the I suppose the turn of the century, I decided to go travelling. So I gave up work, took off, and I went across America and Canada and did lots of interesting things. And then I thought, at some point I'm going to have to go home, go back to the UK. What am I going to do? Am I going to go back to Honeywell, or what am I going to do? And I thought, I'd like to be able to keep travelling, so I'd start my own business. Well, naively, I thought that I'd just be able to every few months take off and go to Australia. And no. So what happens is, as most of you know, I guess, is when you work for yourself, you probably work twice as hard for half amount as much money. And that's really what really happened to me. So I started my own business, and it was great, really. But I was very much single, and what I managed to do is I managed to rent my house out, and I went and lived. I did some work for a voluntary organisation where they would house me. So I managed to get my house paid for, being the the mortgage being paid, and a bit extra, so that was being paid, and I could do my own thing with the voluntary work. And that just sort of grew, so it complemented my the amount of money that I had and I could use with my new business. And I tended to buy an old van and sort of get out there and do that sort of stuff, and I just gradually grew the business. But it was very much Mrs. Jones on the end, servicing her gas boiler. But I didn't really want to stay like that. I wanted to grow it and get into the commercial world. And really that's what I did. So that's sort of how I got going.
Fantastic. Let's touch on the TA a bit more. So what rank did you attain?
I ended up as a W02. W01, a warrant officer first class, which was great. I was put in for a commission a couple of times. It didn't quite work out with the time that I did.
You might need to explain that. Warrant officer is the highest non-commissioned officer, which in theory means you're not in charge of a body of men, but in practice probably means you are.
Yeah. You're on the ground. I remember going, being called up to the Gulf, and we had to go to Germany. So we were on a ferry going from Harwich to the Hook of Holland, and we had weapons and everything else going on to this thing, and it was all down to me. So you think, if one of these weapons goes missing, it's on my head. So a lot of responsibility. Yeah, a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, those weapons may have started life going through my dad, who was also called up. But fortunately, well, he was getting, I'll say he was getting old. He was younger than I was at that time. Because he was RAOC, so he was in logistics, as it is now.
Yeah.
So how did you find that? Because obviously that's very responsible.
Loved it. The force is, it's a big family, really. If a lot of people have, some people have had bad experiences with the forces. I love the forces. You meet people from all walks of life, creeds and colours and all the rest of it, and you just sort of, you tend to be thrown together and you tend to gel. And it's a kind of, I just think it's a great experience. I've just got some great memories from people from, I remember there was a chap from Sunderland, and nobody could understand this guy from Sunderland. His accent was just, the Scots, the Liverpudlians, the Scousers, nobody could understand this guy. We used to call him Clunk. And he was just completely, but you'd have to decipher what he said. But it was a great melting pot, and a good, lots of humour all the time, and just banter and taking the mickey out of each other and all that. So I loved it. And I loved all of a sudden we'd be, next week we're in the Falklands. So we'd fly off down there and we'd look after the estate down in the Falklands. And that was just a great experience, and a great, all of a sudden the government's giving you the sort of the tools and the impetus to work on their equipment. And it was just a real eye-opener. And I remember being in the Falklands, and it was thick snow, terrible weather. And we had one of the boilers were losing something like 40 cubic metres of water in a day. And we were looking around to try and find where this leak was going on, and we could just see this big patch in the snow. That's where it is. So digging down, that's where we found the leak. But it's that sort of stuff. It's just good times and good fun, and just working with different people from all sorts of different backgrounds. But what I got involved with specialist teams within the Royal Engineers, and that really worked with, so if you were from the oil industry, or you were from the, ports industry, shipping, or whatever it was, they get those people together, and you'd go out and be the specialist in that sort of role. So when we were called to go to the second Gulf War, they got all of the people who were involved with fuels, and at that time I was involved with fuels, out. And I was with the units who got the infrastructure going again. So all the power stations and the refineries, we managed to get in and get all that going, which was certainly an interesting time.
Fantastic. So moving on, you already touched on some of the charity work you've done, and that developed into more.
Did.
And in fact, you've got an interesting thing you do at the moment.
I do, yeah. The charity thing, I don't know, it's something that with business, we're all in business, we're all turn a profit, and that's what it's all about. We've got to do that, because otherwise we're not going to be here. But with charity work, it's something that gives you something in the heart, and it's very, unless you really felt it, you don't really don't quite get it maybe. But I remember I looked at doing it, and I wanted to do some things, and the first bit of charity work I did, where I was going to be housed, I was going to be living in with youngsters who'd gone off the rails. And typical backgrounds maybe were dad was a drug dealer and mum was on the game. And it was that sort of stuff. So the child would be there, 17, 18, wanting to do something. And my job really was to run a home and to show them how you get in from work and you can put a meal on in 20 minutes, and a decent meal, and just show them how to live, how most of us live. And they hadn't really had that experience, so it was a really good experience. It was hard, and a lot of them fell by the wayside, but on the whole, it was good. So I did that. That worked out okay. Then I went on and did some work for the probation service, and that was after the Afghanistan and the Gulf War. Had a lot of soldiers who'd come back and had PTSD and all sorts of different things, and they ran into trouble with crime and all that sort of thing. So I got involved with basically somebody who'd been in prison, for example, come out of prison and wanted to try and turn their life around. So I'd meet up with them on a Sunday night over a coffee at Starbucks, and we'd be talking about how they could do that, how they could put the pieces back together again. And my job really was, because I'd experienced service life and I was familiar with the military, it was a one-to-one, and we could talk the same language. So that was the second one I did. And sometimes you think you're a glutton for punishment, because when I stopped doing that, there was a little bit of a void in my life, because I thought, well, there's something missing. I enjoy my life, and I've got family life and all the rest of it, but something was I'm not putting back at the moment, and I kind of felt a little bit of a void. So what I did was I looked through a voluntary magazine, really, just looking for volunteers of different things. And what I found was an organisation called Grand Mentors. And Grand Mentors really are there to provide support for youngsters who've been in care. So typically parents aren't there, they're in the care system. And a lot of them are really, once they get to a certain age, they're turfed out, and it's like you're on your own. And a lot of those, as we all know, we've come from families, it's hard for us when we come from a loving background, but when you've come from that type of background, it's very, very hard. And all the opportunities to fall by the wayside, drink, drugs, alcohol, all the rest of the things which are prolific. And so my job really is to meet up with a youngster, and I've just been assigned to a youngster, Sam, and he wants to become an electrician. So I think they match us up with people who are in that sort of industry type thing. And my job really is just to guide him. And I can't make anything happen with him. It's got to come from him, which we all get. But I think having somebody who can just phone up and just say, how do I go about doing this? Or how do I go, how do I do this? How do I do that? And that's really my role. And it's early days with this one, but it's really exciting, really, really exciting. Now, as I say, it just gives you a little bit of warmth in the heart, just to give something back to the community. Moved back to Farnham. My business, as I said earlier, my business moved back to Farnham, but I'm very much putting into the environment. This is our town, and we want to make it work. And it's that sort of thing, and there's all the different tiers of that. You do the same sort of thing, I know.
I'm not here to talk about it today. That's another day. So along the way, things changed because you mentioned you were single.
Yeah.
And you're clearly wearing a ring of some description.
Yeah.
So what happened?
Okay, I was footloose and fancy free for most of my life, a long, long time, and I just worked all the time. And when I didn't work, I was away with the TA, so I was always just doing this sort of stuff, always doing that. Had girlfriends, all that sort of stuff, had a great life, but never really found Miss Right. And I was in a jazz club in London, and I met my future wife, Fabi, who's a French national, lovely lady, and she's got a lot of interest that I've got. She's a linguist, and when I say a failed linguist, I try very hard, but it's an ongoing process, as Simon knows himself. But yeah, so I met Fabi, we hit it off. She was very much in London. Then she came out to Aldershot. She saw the delights of Aldershot. And we spent some time there, and then we decided to get married. And then we bought a property in France, in Normandy. So we have a son now, 10-year-old Jack. And so he's at school in France with his mum. So I spend 10 years. I spent
10 years here.
No, I don't. let me roll that back.
Going back after he's finished university.
Absolutely. I spend 4 weeks out in France and then 4 weeks over here. So I have an office over there. So I do a lot of business over there. And then when I'm over here, I'm more on the tools and sort of running things and that sort of stuff, and out and about and support. My life is very much back and forth across the channel. So if anybody wants to know about how to get a ferry from here, there and everywhere, let me know, because I'll guide you.
Which is obviously a challenge, but you've got a nice team behind you.
I have.
So
Yeah.
without going overboard, tell us a little bit about what you do and what you cover.
Okay. We basically, as I say, we really look at, when I say we look after buildings, the building services side is actually the sort of spannering type thing. So we've got the spanners, and we're working on the boilers, the gas boilers, and making sure that they're as efficient as possible and not burning too much energy and not producing carbon monoxide rather than carbon dioxide, that sort of thing. So we do all that, the technicalities of it, run the pumps, make sure that all works. If you have a large commercial building, you're spending an absolute fortune on heating, absolute eye-watering amounts of money. So we go in and we'll service all that kit, but also we'll be saying to them, by the way, the upgrades now are heat pumps and other things that will reduce a lot of your costs. So why don't you start to look at that? So we start to we steer them. We consider ourselves a partner with them, and so we really sort of hold their hand a little bit and say, well, we could do that in a better way, or we could do that, and we just try to save them money as much as possible. Whether they listen to us or not is another matter. But it's very much in that sort of, we try and create a partnership and we try and run with them for the duration, which is, some of our contracts go back 20, 25 years. So we look after people and we do our best to do the right thing for them.
Well, that's good, because for me and for you, business is about relationships and longevity.
Sure.
As much as we'd like to make a fast buck, it's not in our DNA.
No.
It's really not in our DNA. So looking forward, obviously you're married, you've got a 10-year-old, you've got a successful business. What's the future look like for Des?
What does the future look like? Well, I'm a bit of a workaholic, so it's difficult to put the tools down. people say to me, oh, you're in. I mean, I'm in Normandy, which isn't a great wine region, but I mean, just sit back and drink wine and eat cheese all day. And although that's tempting, it's just not me. I just, within, half a day of that, I want to go and do something. And so I like the idea of basically sort of gradually handing more over to the company and getting them sort of sorted out, and maybe gradually spending more time instead of four. It did start out with a long weekend over in France and sort of 3 months over here. So my son would say, "Who's that man who just walked in the door?" And his mother would say, "That's your father." But it's gradually got better. So I'd like to spend maybe 6-7 weeks and just gradually do that and just gradually build up the time. But just, I love work, and I think it's good to be active, and I'm 59 next week, and so just gradually, old soldiers don't die, they wither away, and I think that's the mantra.
Well, because you said that, old accountants just we just lose our balance. Well, I guess happy birthday for next week.
Thank you very much.
Somebody might buy you a present, I don't know. I suppose we've got time. We've made it to question time.
Oh, wow.
Does anybody have any? Look, it's Alistair.
Hi, sir.
Hi, good to meet you. I'm interested in your 4 weeks in the business, 4 weeks off, and how you manage that with your team and things, because 4 weeks is quite a long time to be away, and then I guess for them having you not there and then taking responsibility, and then suddenly you're back in full on, and how do you manage that change?
It's taken me 20 years to get to that. You have to have good people. It's really important that you get good people on board. And what I mean by good people, who really want to develop and understand the complications and what responsibility means. So getting the right manager on top and who can manage other people is absolutely crucial. That's really what I managed to do, and I had some unsuccessful times trying to do that, and it didn't quite work. Yeah. And that meant that on occasions I'd have to rush back, or I just couldn't spend the time over in France. So it took a long time to do that, but the key to it is getting the right people and being very honest with them and saying, look, this is what I'm looking at doing. You're going to be the face of the business. You're going to be the responsible person. You're going to be the one who's going to have to, there's a 7-8 o'clock call in the evening, you're going to have to come back to the office or work from home and get things organised. Just making sure you're really clear with them. Don't cover anything up, because otherwise it will come out when you least expect it. And I think that's really the secret, and just building the infrastructure. With any business, I really believe it's building that infrastructure that you keep going back to the same thing. My business does a lot of 24/7 call-outs, and we look after a lot of care homes. And what that means is that, if you're on call, you might get a call at 10 o'clock on a Sunday night. And you've got to have the right person to go, right, okay, don't just run out the door, but what you do is you look at the problem and you try and advise them if they can fix it themselves before you go out. If you can't, you've got to go out yourself. Now, I still do that when I come back. I still cover the guys and that sort of thing. But that's the responsibility that the manager's got to take and your team has got to take. They've got to realise that. Because if they're going to go, sorry, phone's gone dead, or I've lost my battery, you're going to ultimately lose work. You're going to lose the contracts, and you're not going to be the company that you've set up to be. So I don't know if I've answered that in too wordy.
You certainly answered a bit for when you're away. I guess it's the transition for them, for you coming back again in a way, because they've had that freedom and responsibility.
I'm in my office in France. We're doing emails all the time. Yeah. So I'm still doing sales. I'm still, I'm looking at monitoring emails. I'm monitoring performance. So that's what's really good. I can still do that. So it's not like they don't see me for 4 weeks. That we're regularly, literally I'll get on the ferry on a Thursday night and I'll be in my office on midday Friday. Yeah. So there's a lot of dialogue, and I think that's important. But it's a trust thing as well. You've got to gradually build that trust thing up, that you can hang your coat on their decisions, and I think that's really important. So you look like you're in the trade yourself. So is it something you're planning?
No,
okay.
I'm in the care sector.
Oh, are you?
Not
okay.
Care homes, but care in people's own homes.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So 24/7 as well.
Same. Yeah. You know what it's like. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's all about teamwork, and you touched on some of the things that make high performance award-winning teams.
Yeah.
Which is the hardest thing. I mean, many of us are sole traders, and many of us are small businesses, and the transition is massive. And as you go further down the road, you get more challenges, which I'm sure Mark could talk to us about, and maybe should at some point.
Yeah, but like you say, the teamwork. Sorry, the teamwork thing. My background with the forces. If you can't trust the guy next to you when you're being scudded by the the Iraqi army, you can't trust anyone, and you just build those relationships, really close relationships, and you have to have that. So sorry, yeah.
I was just interested because you came to your career yourself through an apprenticeship. I was wondering if you had taken on apprentices yourself in your business, and if so, what's been your experience?
Many. I've really enjoyed the apprenticeship thing. Again, the sort of looking after youngsters who've gone off the rails is that sort of thing. I've had some great experience with apprenticeships, and I think that in this country, if we don't train the next generation or don't think about training the next generation, there's not going to be another professional generation. They're just going to, they're going to wither and die. You've got to put that investment of what you've done in your career back into the next generation. I've done it many times. Probably 20, 30 over the years, apprentices have come through my company. I believe in it. It's in my sort of my core. I think, and without wanting to slate the younger generation or anything like that, I think with us in business, we know that 8 o'clock means 10 to 8. So if you start turning up at 1:30 or and this sort of stuff all the time, it's not going to happen. You're going to run out of patience, your client's going to run out of patience, you're going to lose business. And I think a lot of youngsters nowadays don't really quite get that before they come to work. In the old days, I think mum and dad would teach you that from a young age, that you were fit for school and work and the rest of it. And sometimes that breaks down a little bit. But you have to sort of just take your time, take a step back and just give them the time to develop. Many of them that I've had have really just relished the opportunity and the challenge. I think you've got to give them responsibility from an early start as well. We live in a bit of a culture where it's almost like we're responsibility adverse. You don't want to give that to them. The moment you give your youngsters a responsibility, they have to live up to it and they have to grow. And I think that's a really important thing. As my little one, one of his first job was to feed the cat. You feed the cat and then this sort of grows, and it's just giving them a bit of responsibility. So apprentices, don't leave it until the end of their apprenticeship to give them responsibility. Get them out, and we used to get ours out on call outs and all sorts of different things from an early start, because then they get the bare bones of the business, and it will shake out anybody who doesn't really want to do it, is not committed. But I think it's a wonderful thing. We've got to do it. All of us in this room who've got a business and want to follow that through, you've got to project that, give it back. Thanks for the question.
Property maintenance is probably one of the most challenging industries when it comes to everybody wants to actually go to your clients and offer to do it cheaper.
Very much so.
And I'm sure a lot of the other businesses here have been in that sort of, do I try and get involved in that race to the bottom? How do you counter that?
Very appropriate question. And absolutely, you're absolutely right. I've got one at the moment where we look after a care home in North London. We got involved with the install was going on, and the install was all about price. Everything was about price, so everything was just cut back to the bone. So they installed this place, and this is a luxury care home. So the services really aren't fit for purpose. So when I went back and looked at it under the warranty period, I just found lots and lots of things wrong. That's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. I went back and fed this information back, and it was kind of like, oh, okay. And I said, look, you've got to get it done before the warranty finishes, because otherwise you'll be paying for it. And gradually they take that on board. But then the drainage, the sewerage pumps, the effluent pumps were breaking down all the time because of the installation, the poor installation, the pipework was wrong. So we were regularly having to send tankers out to literally get rid of all this stuff, otherwise they'd be shut down. Did all that. And recently they've come back and said, you've given us a price to put these tankers back in and redo this thing, but we've gone out and we can get it cheaper. Now my thing is that we look after the pumps, everything else, all the controls, the electrical side of things. Now when you get somebody who's just cheaper, there's a danger there, because they could go into the control panel, do something wrong, blow the thing up, whatever you do. And if it's just about price, you have to get them to try and see that it's counterproductive, that we won't be the cheapest, we won't be the most expensive, but we're going to be somewhere in the middle, but you'll get the quality that you want, and you'll get the ticks in the box, if that makes sense, and it will be safe. And so I've had that argument, and my client came back to me and said, you know, I can get this price, and the price was several £100s cheaper. Looked at it, and you know, the decision is, what do we do? My decision was, right, try and give them something back a little bit and see if they'll go with us, but we can't match that price. And it's tempting to say, oh, we'll match the price, but then you get driven down, the quality goes down, and you don't make any profit. So we agreed to put another price in. It was more expensive, and they came back to us and said, okay, we'll stick with that. But regular meetings with the clients as well, building the relationship with the client to say, look, you know, you can get. We lost some work for a care home provider. We looked after all their kit, and they were going, you know, afterwards we found out they were going to literally to the yellow pages to get people to come in and do the technicalities of their boiler room. I can't compete with that. You'll always find somebody who's going to be cheaper. But if you want the quality and you want the certification, all the rest of it, and the continuity of business, you've got to, you know, and it's always negotiable. Sit with your clients regularly and talk these things through and be honest with each other that there is a cost to these things, and that, you know, we'll find the middle ground. But for me, it's long-term business. It's not about a quick buck and get another client. It's all about keeping the clients you've got, providing you've got that synergy. Does that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Does that answer you?
But do you find, Des, that some clients have gone away, then have a bad experience and come back?
Yeah, very, very much so. Again, another care home we looked after through a third party, and my office phoned them up to say, your service is due next month. Just to, you know, have you had any problems, or where are you? And they said, oh no, we're not going to use you anymore. And so, you know, I heard this and I was horrified. Phoned the chap up, Barry, and I said, you know, what's happened, Barry? Where have we let you down? No, it's not you, it's the third party. I said, look, you know, this is some years ago. I said, well, look, we're a small business. You know, I can't afford to lose that work. What's happened? Oh, we've just fallen out with them. I don't want to use them anymore. So I said, look, you know, I'm really, when I say laid it on thick, I mean, it was, you know, any job, any work you've got, you want to keep, especially with a decent client. So eventually he said, look, and I said, look, I'll come back next year. Can we re-quote for it next year? Yeah, of course you can. So with that, within about a week, phoned back and just said, the new people have taken over, aren't what we want. Can you come back? So it's like, yeah, of course we can. So we went back, and we didn't go through the third party. We went directly to them. And that's, some people would look at that as poaching work, but it's not. For me, it's they'd already lost it. You know, it's very much, it's offered to us, and they wanted the continuity, and we're still there now.
I think it's an important part that people tend to forget when it comes to marketing. If the client's going to jump because of price, it's always worth contacting them again 6 months or a year down the line.
Yeah.
Because then they've had the chance to see it ain't going to be what I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
And they've already got the relationship with you, so giving them the chance to come back is always worthwhile.
Absolutely. And I think there's an old mantra which says people like to do business with people they like. And if you take that hit sometimes and you phone them up, and what I always try and say to my people is, you know, when there's a dispute and there's a personality clash and you can't really get on with that person, you've got to be a little bit like, where have we gone wrong? You've got to go along with that approach. If you go along with an approach of defence, you're never going to get quite over that. You've just got to expose yourself to where's this broken down? Where have we gone wrong? And you'll find something. I mean, I remember a chap many years ago, well, not that many. I used to go to the site, and he was always very much against me, and I couldn't really work it out. And I sort of, okay, how do we get over this? And I said to him, I said, look, let's have a cup of coffee and try and, you know, if I've said anything out of turn or upset you, you know, couldn't really get through it. And eventually, I called his manager in. I said, look, we've got to get over this because it's detrimental. Because, you know, 24-hour call out won't call you out, said that he's called you out, or whatever it is. You need to have a close relationship. And so eventually his manager came down and tried to organise a meeting, but he wouldn't sit down with me. And it was just, you know, I couldn't work it out. But anyway, 3 months later, he was found out for taking backhanders. So he was taking money, and he wanted to get rid of my company to get his own company in so that he'd get a backhander somewhere. And so sometimes these things just come out in the wash. I couldn't really work that one out, but it was just one of those things. But my thing was, look, you know, if I've upset you or I've parked in your parking space or insulted the dog or whatever it is, I don't know, let me know, and I wouldn't do it intentionally. You know, and I think you've just got to be a little bit like, I mean, that's my way in business, I think. Yeah.
Any more?
Just to
Simon.
A very quick one. When you're in your French office, do you have to speak any French?
My wife lived in England for 20 years, so she's very much an Anglophile. Most French people I've ever spoken to, when you mention the English, they'll sort of spit on the floor, you know. But she's very Anglophile. But she will say to me, look, at the table we'll speak in French. And my French is I can get by, but it's clunky. So I'll be at the table and we'll all be speaking French. And she's the first one to say, pass the mustard. So I sort of, okay, you know. So, but I do, yeah, I try my best, but it's an uphill struggle. Thanks for an appropriate question.
Well,
Just remember your answer is on camera.
Yeah, it's going to get to her at some point.
Last, very quick
Of course you
last
can, Emma.
question.
Last
Thank
question.
you. Just because we've just opened up Real Cinemas in Farnham, and Paul and I were at the opening party last night.
It
We
was-
were discussing films.
It was really good.
It was really good, and we thought we were discussing the fact the best question to ask people is not what's your favourite film, because everyone was like, oh god, that's really hard. But what film have you ever watched twice or more than twice?
I'm probably the worst person to say, because all my films are back in the 50s and 60s. I'm sort of, you know, that sort of... my son at the moment is really into Napoleon. So we've seen the Napoleon film a couple of times. So we've seen it in English and in French, and he loves Napoleon, so he's all about that. So I've watched that one. For me personally, there's a film that I liked, which is a late 1960s sort of counterculture film called If, about a public school that sort of implodes. And I really like that film, so I've seen that several times. But you opened the cinema in the town.
Not me personally.
Oh, okay, yeah. Oh, okay. I saw it on the way through. It looks fantastic.
It does look fantastic. It's amazing, isn't it?
It
It's
is.
really, really amazing.
It's well done.
What an asset, yeah.
Exciting.
Yeah. I still grieve the loss of the Redgrave Theatre. I don't know if you remember that. You know, it was loss of culture.
Yeah, I'm old enough to remember that.
Yeah.
I'm clearly not.
Before your time.
I went to the Redgrave Theatre 3 times. Well, more than 3 times, but 3 times I sat next to Lisa Goddard,
Oh, wow.
which was just very bizarre.
Wow. She was married to Elvin Stardust.
She was, with the one leather glove.
And the ring.
Yeah. We're going completely the wrong direction now. Can we thank Des in a normal manner? Thank you very much.
Thank you.